Thank you. I want to thank those who have organised this meeting. In the 10 minutes I've got, I want to say something about the moment in which we find ourselves, what is required of all of us, but what is required of those in academic spaces to show active solidarity. And in saying that, I will briefly touch on what is required and the necessity of pushing back against the attempt in academic spaces to silence Palestinian voices and those advocating for Palestinian rights, which is an arena which PSC has had to devote considerable resources and time over the past few years. Look, this meeting obviously takes place in the midst of what has unfolded as the darkest moment in the enduring Palestinian struggle for liberation. About 1 week after October the 7th, I remember watching Newsnight, where a US political and military analyst was asked this question: how many Palestinians, he was asked, might be killed before there is any serious pressure on Israel to enact a ceasefire? He gave an answer that chilled me, but despite my deep knowledge from many years of campaigning and as a Palestinian of the dynamics and history of Israel's 75-year-long history of the oppression of the Palestinian people, and despite my knowledge of the depths of international and particularly Western complicity in that oppression, an answer I found difficult to accept. He did a calculation based on the rate of killing of Palestinians in Gaza in 2014, where you will recall Israel killed over a 52-day period over 2,000 Palestinians. He analysed the rate of killing in the current assault, a Palestinian being killed every 6 minutes, and he came up with a figure of about 20,000 Palestinians killed. Now, I remember thinking, I don't think that is conceivable. That scale of mass slaughter, the majority of whom would inevitably be civilians, thousands of whom would inevitably be children, a slaughter that would inevitably be live streamed across the world. I didn't think it would be conceivable that that amount of Palestinian blood being shed would be tolerable even to our political leaders. And yet here we are, 3+ months later, and the scale of killing has significantly exceeded that and is not yet at an end. Now, for weeks we have all known that what we are witnessing is a genocide. And of course that charge has now been formally laid against Israel in the International Court of Justice, and as we've just heard, and as you know, with a preliminary judgment due tomorrow. In her extraordinary submission to the court, South Africa's lawyer quoted the Palestinian priest, Munza Isaac, who in a sermon he delivered in Bethlehem on Christmas Day said this: "Gaza, as we know it," he said, "no longer exists. This is an annihilation. This is a genocide. We will rise. We will stand up again from the midst of destruction, as we have always done as Palestinians. But I want you to look in the mirror and ask yourself this: where was I when Gaza was going through a genocide? This is a simple moral test, and our political leaders are failing that test. They are green lighting genocide. They are complicit. They are complicit in mass slaughter. Now, that complicity is, of course, nothing new. We all know that history did not begin on October the 7th, and that genocide Israel has unleashed in response to what happened on October the 7th comes in the context of decades of military occupation and the imposition upon all of the Palestinian people of a system of apartheid, a system of oppression built on one simple principle: that across all of historic Palestine, some people, Israeli Jews, have rights, and others, Palestinians, do not. What we are witnessing is the extreme manifestation of what happens when you fail to hold perpetrators of injustice to account, when you fail to implement and uphold international law, when you normalise the dispossession, ethnic cleansing, dehumanisation and slaughter of an entire people over many decades. Now, as we know that in response to this genocide, our leaders have not only failed to act to try to halt it, but have actually actively deepened their complicity economically, militarily, politically and diplomatically. But as they have done that, hundreds of thousands of British citizens have refused to do nothing, have refused to turn away, have refused to be complicit. The mobilisation of solidarity we have seen over the past few months has been extraordinary. I heard Hussein, the ambassador, recently describe this as one of the bright lights in a landscape of utter darkness. And I'm proud, as the director of PSC, of the role we have played, not just in terms of the huge marches that have been mobilised in London, but in the intervening days of action which have seen vigils, protests, marches and boycott actions such as pickets and occupation of Barclays banks happening in dozens of towns and cities across the UK. We have seen activism across all sectors of life: health workers, media workers, cultural sectors, school children and of course campus spaces. Now, our urgent task across the broad solidarity movement is to mobilise all of those levers of pressure to create intense pressure on our politicians to call for a ceasefire and to end the siege. But the deeper and longer term task is to harness and build on that outpouring of solidarity and harness it into a sustained movement for change. And the dynamics of the change required have not altered. Our part here in the UK in supporting Palestinians to dismantle apartheid and achieve freedom is to end the complicity of our government, end the complicity of our public bodies, end the complicity of our companies and corporations in supporting Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people. So there are crucial areas of action to take forward in universities. Forging links with Palestinian academic institutions as a fundamental act of solidarity, what Karma Nalbusi always used to refer to as Solidarity 101. That simple act, that simple linking that says to the oppressed, I see you, I hear you, I stand with you. Acting to draw attention to the systematic assault on the educational sector in Palestine, including the literal destruction of education institutions right now in Gaza, as a fundamental part of Israel's campaign to erase and destroy Palestinian civil society. Thirdly, taking forward divestment campaigns to end universities' investments in the companies, especially arms companies, that are complicit in supporting Israeli apartheid. PSC's University Complicity Database details over £400 million of such investments held by British universities and the companies involved. And we will be tomorrow announcing a divestment day of action across UK campuses on February the 20th. Refusing to cross the Palestinian picket line, supporting academic boycotts aimed at institutions complicit in the violation of Palestinian rights. And it also means, as we have heard, acting to resist the attempts to silence Palestinian voices and those advocating for Palestinian rights. Our government, shamefully supported by the Labour opposition, not only refuses to take the steps necessary to hold Israel to account, but proactively engages in attempts to suppress Palestinian voices, Palestinian rights, and those advocating in support of those rights. We see this through the grotesque anti-boycott bill, which will prevent public bodies, including universities, taking action to divest from complicit companies, and contains a special clause which gives Israel a unique protection, the only state in the world under which, if this law passes, no future minister can exempt from the provisions of the bill to allow divestment. This bill is back in the Lords in February. We have mobilised a coalition of more than 70 civil society organisations in opposition, and we now need to ramp up all possible levers of pressure on the Lords to prevent this bill passing. And all of you, we've heard about it, will be familiar with the ongoing processes across universities and elsewhere to suppress activism for Palestine and support for BDS via a conflation of such activism with anti-Semitism, including through pressure for universities to adopt and implement the IHRA definition, as Michael spoke about earlier. Anyone in any doubt about how the IHRA has been used to close down meeting spaces and target academics and students should have had those doubts removed by the publication in September of an important report from BRISMAS and the European Legal Support Centre, supported by PSC, which detailed over 40 cases where, using the IHRA, spurious allegations of anti-Semitism were brought against students, academics, student unions and societies, leading to investigation. Not one of the 40 allegations, once investigated, were substantiated, but all, as intended, added to the chilling effect. Let me return, in conclusion, to Munter Isaac's sermon. He sought to deliver two messages to us. One, of the endurance, sumud, and resistance of the Palestinian people, even in this darkest moment. But secondly, that our moral test is to act now to prevent genocide, but to sustain our activism to dismantle the system of oppression that has led us to this moment. Our message to the Palestinian people and to our political leaders needs to be the same, that we will never stop protesting, we will never stop marching, we will never stop boycotting until a ceasefire is called, until the occupation is ended, until apartheid is dismantled, and until the day arrives when we stand shoulder to shoulder with our Palestinian brothers and sisters in a new world, in a better world, and in a world in which the sun will finally rise over a free Jaffa, over a free Jerusalem, and over a free Gaza. Thank you.